Hi, everybody. Tonight we're going to be discussing the wisdom of the character Luke Skywalker. We are going to explore this character and different ways that aspects of his life can speak to us and help us to truly grow in certain ways. And there's going to be a few different quotes from different scenes in the films that I'm going to bring up now, and I'm going to comment on them so that you can find these different insights that are very important to our lives. And the thing is that one of the essential questions that we're going to be speaking about in this video is how can we determine which movements in ourselves, which emotions, which inspirations, which ideas are coming from a good place and should be followed. That's going to be one of the questions we're going to think about. We're also going to wonder about the ways in which we hold spiritual figures and ways in which we look at spiritual figures in our lives. We're going to see that as an issue. Like, are we over idolizing people? And what is why do we do that? And how can we overcome that? We're also going to look at the issue of hope, and how we often struggle with these issues of hope. And so that's going to be a main thing as well. And another thing I want to mention is that the most important thing I think we can learn from Luke Skywalker is that in his context, and for people who have the father wound that says, I never want to be like my father. The father is a negative figure. And of course, some people have a positive father figure where there may be that same phrase, I'll never be like him, but it's said positively, like I'll never manage to be like him. Some people have that thing of like, I never want to be my father. That's some people's wound. Other people's, I'll never manage to live up to my father's legacy. But Luke Skywalker as a character, I believe one of the most important and hopeful things about his journey for those who have that negative father wound is that he shows a pathway toward becoming a true whole person, a true man, a true father. As Yoda says, you must confront Vader. Then and only then a Jedi will you be. He becomes a Jedi by having mercy on his father, by sparing his father's life. And in that way, the wound becomes the path. The obstacle becomes the way. And anyone who's struggling with a father wound like that should also understand that the path is laid out for them to become whole. That once we become capable of mercy and empathy, if that's the type of wound we have become the Father. Our Father is the one on whom, when we read in the Gospels, it says, you must be children of your Father in heaven. He sends the rain on the just. Forgive others. Love everybody, love your enemies, and pray for those who persecute you, and you shall be children of your Father in heaven. Because He sends rain on the just and on the unjust. It's like there's this way in which God provides for all. We have to be like Him to be His children. And if we can do that, if somebody can do that like Luke did for his father, if that's the type of wound they're struggling with, they will become father-like through that. And that path has been laid out and provided intelligently. It's been intelligently designed for them as the pathway toward becoming father-like. They're not wounded; they just have a different track. They're on they are wounded. They are wounded, but like that's one track to becoming a father is by having that empathy for the person who wounded you, and the other track is to realize the father has empathy for you. He's not expecting you to live up to his legacy and prove yourself. It's like it's one or the other. Like each way is a doorway into that empathy, and God has intelligently designed our lives so as to bring about the greatest good. Whatever is the greatest good for everything. That's whatever track we're on. Whether it's one type of wound or the other type of wound. And so I think that that's a really hopeful thing that we get out of the character Luke Skywalker's life is the resolution of a pathway toward the resolution of that father wound, which we would otherwise, especially people on that negative track, would see as otherwise insurmountable, that they'd see their brokenness as permanent rather than their their brokenness as a pathway forward. It reminds me, and I don't necessarily, there was a quote from somebody, it was talking about like how, it's kind of like, the big things in life. It's almost like we have to stretch our mouth to swallow them. It's kind of like, or a heavy thing in life, we have to really strain to lift it. We get stronger. It's that same analogy that the thing that is actually the obstacle is actually the way that we get what we need. And so that's something I think that's very important. And there was a quote from Pope Benedict the 16th, who said, God writes, God writes straight with crooked lines and can kind of, work things out, in a way that we can, be, receive and give love. Basically, I'm paraphrasing the quote, but I think that we have to learn in our lives to read straight lines of God's love through the crooked lines of painful providence. And I think that's very important. That God is writing straight with crooked lines, and we have to learn how to read providence and learn how to read love in the. We have to have faith in love, and understand and see love in the tragic things, because God's making us real, making us gritty like His Son, basing everything in reality, making us deeper, making us able to help others. And even we could say that, like, Luke is a greater father than he ever would be. He is more fatherly in sparing his father than he would have been had he had a normal father. So we should realize that the heights of our fatherhood are rooted in the depths of our wounds, whether that's the wound of the positive father wound, I'll never be able to live up to my father's legacy, or the negative one, I want to never leave my father's legacy, But the depth of the heights of our fatherhood are often are what is intended in the depths of the wounds. So God meant it for good, whatever forces might mean anything for bad, God meant everything for good, as we read in the story of Joseph and his brothers in the Old Testament. So, what else can we say about Luke Skywalker? We want to also understand, because sometimes what happens is that father wounds can lead us to have different impulses in our lives. Whether it's somebody trying to prove themselves, or someone trying to prove that they're like their father, or trying to prove that they're not like their father. And and we have to be able to try to figure out, that we don't want what Yoda says. Yoda says, once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny. And so whenever there is any hate inside of us, that is the defining factor of our lives. Whatever we hate inside of, whatever we truly hate, whoever we don't want to be, whatever self we fear to be, that is what dominates our destiny. We see this especially in the prequel trilogy with Anakin Skywalker. His feared self is to be unable to protect his wife. And that feared self, trying to avoid that feared self, leads to the very things that he fears, leads to the destruction of his wife and family in various ways. So so the thing is, whatever is our feared self, that's the path to the dark side, that thing we fear. And so that thing we don't want to be, that thing we hate, the person we don't want to be, that's what's sending up things. And we know that these things are going on in our lives because so many times we don't know, we can't think clearly. We're not doing clearly. We're being governed by unconscious forces because we haven't cleared out the resentments that live in our past. And so life is not flowing clearly through us. So we are not thinking clearly. Our minds are clouded. Our minds are disoriented. And so our minds trying not to become, having that program deep inside of us say that I don't want to become that. Like the radar is now on. And now you don't know why. You say, now you don't know why you want to do anything. Like, let's say your father was someone who, was hardworking. So therefore you don't want to work. Or your father was a womanizer, therefore you don't want to be around women. Your father did drugs, so you never want to drink or do any drugs. It's like, or let's say your father was, was boring and didn't talk to people. Okay, you want to be the life of the party, so you're trying to do the opposite or something. You're trying to do the opposite, and so that's what's something that may happen if you don't deal with the darkness inside you. If you don't, and especially or if you don't learn to accept and have that empathy for your father, you'll try to put on some type of veneer to not be like him. You'll try to not be like him, and so that's something that may happen. And so we have to, and so we have to understand that inside of ourselves we may have impulses to do good things, but they may be coming from the wrong place. So, for example, let's say somebody wants to, someone's always trying to be successful and be the best at business, but the real thing that's going on is that they think they'll never live up to being as good as their father, and so that's what's really going on. Or somebody says, "Oh, I want to, my father." Let's just say someone has a father who's abusive and beats everybody up all the time, and so you never want to raise your voice. So there's some good in some of these things. Being successful and being patient are both good, but there's something going wrong. And so how do we discern whether we're being inspired to do something? Like, let's say somebody wants to be a priest rather than be a layman because they, or let's say somebody wants to not be religious because their father was religious. It's like so these big shifts. We have to understand these kind of shifts in different ways that can happen. We have to know whether things are inspiring, whether these good ideas, whether it's success, priesthood, being patient, we have to understand where these things are coming from and purify them. And so how do we do that? We need to be able to discern. And Luke Skywalker in Return of the Jedi, he's speaking to Yoda and he says, "How will I know the good side from the bad?" And Yoda says, "You will know." He says, so it's like something you will know, and you'll know it directly. He says, when you are calm, passive, and and the thing is, I think what he means is what Saint Ignatius talks about, which is this detachment. Like when we calm ourselves down, when we're not so frantic, we can realize, okay, this thought is agitating me. And he even elaborates the rule further. He gives an interesting rule this is Yoda's rule for the discernment of spirits to add to Saint Ignatius's rules. He says, "The Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack." And so I think that the thing is, when we purify our desire to either attack ourselves for not being like our parents, or to attack our parents, so to speak, by trying to be different than them, that is the purification. So if our motive is attack against our parents or attack against ourselves for not being like our parents, that is not the voice of God. That is a new rule for the discernment of spirits. But I think we do have to be very calm in order to use this rule, because if we're not calm, like Yoda said, we won't be able to notice the actual amount of agitation. Like if we don't slow down, we don't realize actually how crazy we're thinking and acting. We don't realize, okay, something's not right here. This doesn't smell right. It's like, and the thing is, you'll know that your spirituality should be about knowledge and defense. Knowledge and defense, not attack. So that's the thing there. That's I think a really good rule for the use of the light side, so to speak, the good spirit, as Saint Ignatius would say. So if you're it's kind of like this this overreaction. We want to, everything is about the moderation and integration with of the passions. Knowledge and defense are good. We might say the dark side we could also say certainty and attack rather than knowledge and defense. It's like this kind of something that might be a way of phrasing the kind of knowledge polarity. As certainty is the bad the bad type of thing, and you also could recognize the dark side as doubt, doubt and certainty, and attacking and defensiveness. I would phrase it as knowledge and protectiveness would be the light side. Certainty or doubt, attack and defense, I would say, is the dark. So that could be that. But if you calm down, you can kind of see what is underlying this movement. Does this movement move me toward a knowledge of God, a knowledge of myself? Does it protect me also? Does it respect my humanity? Does it protect me? And also to an ordered degree, because obviously sometimes God may call us to do risky things, but the other one is like, am I attacking others? Am I defensive against things? That's probably not a good sign. So that's kind of the discernment of spirits from the life of Luke Skywalker. The other thing that can happen is that we can, one beautiful thing. There was a video, which I can share a link to it, or it was. I think I'll say what it was. I think it was hero psychology or something. It was Star Wars psychology of a hero, something like that. And it was a really beautiful video and had a lot of, it really was helpful to watch because it kind of spoke to a few different issues in my life. Because sometimes whenever we try to put on this, there's a mythologizing of a lot of times whatever mask we put on to deal with our father wound, and really the father wound also can be conceived of as, because the father wound is really a disconnection from the experience of God the Father, who is love, this flow of love of the Trinity. The father wound is really a disconnection based on the improper attachment or resentment toward the figure who is the image of that. So a lot of times, because we plug into this image of the Father, that is like somebody who is like someone we can't live up to, or someone who we can never please, or someone who we don't want to be, it's kind of like I need to please myself to not be that person. I need to avoid everything like that person, or I need to, like the way to be good is to please them, or the way to be good is to not be like that. That's like kind of like the father wounds, rather than this kind of empathy. And obviously the doorway we were saying before back into the life of God, the life of the Father. Obviously there's sacramental elements to this too, but if we're really going into like understanding, just describing this psychological aspect with love, it's either through realizing that the Father, in his highest aspect, if they say he's a really positive father model, he doesn't want you to try to live up to him. He wants you, it's like he doesn't want you to pay him back. He wants you to pay it forward. It's like he doesn't want you to feel like you need to live up to him. The whole thing was he loves you as you are. That's one way back into this empathetic flow, and out of this performance and need to create a false self mindset. The other way could be, you need to love him and understand him in his brokenness, and say, and then all of a sudden now you're back in, you no longer need to be someone other than him because you love him and all his brokenness, and then the elements of you that might resemble him, you're free to resemble him as you should, like in the ways that like you're not like saying, my father was a plumber, so I can't be a plumber, even though that's really what I'd be suited to doing. Like you lose that overreaction because you now love the one who hurt you, and now you're free to be like him because he is now loved, and now you are back reconciled with the Father in heaven. And so each of those are pathways back to the love of the Father in heaven, past either a good or bad father image, so to speak. But the thing is, there's this way in which we make these images. Like, so you're either trying to do things like to get your father's love, or do things to not be like your father, and that image can look a certain way. And so one of the things that was really interesting in this video is they were talking about how Luke Skywalker really, he idolized, the Jedi. He idolized, mythologized the Jedi, and you see him talk about this actually in the sequel trilogy. That they were like they became like mythically, like, oh, they were idolized, they were put on a pedestal. And I mean, and it was really beautiful because they were talking about this naive way that Luke put the Jedi on a pedestal. And I think that that's something that can happen. Like, we could say, like, let's say, why does someone think, oh, it's so cool to be, let's say somebody wants to be like their father. They say, oh, it's so cool to be, like, my dad is a truck driver. I want to ride trucks. Because it's like, because they're becoming like their dad. Or let's say they see something that is unlike their dad. So then these things that are like or unlike their father are the way that they feel like they are a good person. And then this becomes a false self. So the false self becomes this way of like striving to be like the father through these symbolic things, or trying to be unlike the father through symbolic things. And, and eventually it becomes like, okay, so if somebody, let's say their father is a great family man, the person might say, okay, wow, my family, my kids are so unruly, I'm a bad dad or whatever, Or I can't find anybody to get married to, so I'm a failure because I'm not a family man like my dad. Or somebody might say, oh, like, I want to, someone on the other side might say, I want to be a monk because I don't want to be like a family man, because a family is chaotic and I don't want to be like that. It's like they could go that route. And so I think that, sometimes what happens is we idolize these things. We make idolizations because we aren't living in that love of God the Father. We're living in the approval, or the approval games of like trying to share in the approval of that we use the Father image as approval, and the positive one be like, oh, I'm like him, so I'm good, or I'm not like him, so I'm good. So we make these kind of constructs, like we try to do these things that are unlike the Father, and so then, but we're also stuck. Like we're stuck in various ways. Like we're always doing it out of this kind of this pressure. Then the pressure is that we're not living in that empathy, that unconditional, that empathetic love, that heartfelt love, that authoritative good love. That's not like, oh yeah, it's fine, whatever you do. It's not permissive. It's not authoritarian. It's just this kind of this actual love. We're not in touch with love. So, and this is what we were talking about in the previous video with the analogy of, the chick, because and so it's kind of like we aren't in touch with love. Like the chick, when it's in the shell, it's all perfect. So we try to make two kinds of shells. We either make the shell over here that's like, oh, I'm like my dad, or the shell over here, I'm not like my dad. And like over here, to grow, we have to say, oh, how am I like my dad? And how can I love my dad, love my neighbor as myself? Realize, okay, I have to love all the aspects, because Jesus says, the merciful shall receive mercy. The measure you measure shall be measured to you. And even on a very normal level, psychologically, you're going to hate in yourself whatever you hated in your father. You're going to love in yourself whatever you loved in your father. And that thing. So we have to kind of heal that. So over here, we have to realize the messiness that is the ways that we the messiness is like I can't, like I am like my father, and the messiness is I'm not like my father on the other side. And so in order so we have to like kind of be able to love those aspects of ourselves and kind of be like that chick, because only when we come out of the shell can there be warmth, and the parent, the hen is there, or the incubator, whatever it is, there's that warmth and that drying out, and we become we see ourselves as immature but cute, and we begin this process of growing in love, rather than this thing of playing these games of, approval, these different contrasting paths of approval. And so that is something that happens there. And I think that what happens sometimes, people can even can idolize or mythologize. So for example, like the thing of being a Jedi, very much recalls this idea of being a monk, or being a priest. Like, so if somebody says, hey, like, oh, my dad, let's say something, it's really, I don't want to be like my dad. I want to be a different kind of man. They say, okay, that maybe I should be a priest, and so that's going to be a wound. The reason why this could be a negative reason why someone may pursue being a monk, being a priest, because they don't want to be like their father. And this is a way in which this is a false idolization of what it means. This is seeking to be that thing in order to get approval or to avoid the disapproval of being like one's father, rather than doing it as a vocation. It becomes a vacation from being like one's father, and it becomes an ego trip rather than a fatherly self-donation. Because it has to be this thing of this fatherly self-gift. It has to be this thing of self-sacrifice, humility, genuine, and being loved. It has to be this love, and you have to be in touch with the love of the Father to be a father. And so that's really the issue there. And so that's going to be a vacation, not a vocation, because a vacation comes from the love of the Father. There was one deacon who gave a speech once about seeking his vocation. He wanted to be a priest, but he didn't know what to do, and he was praying to God to tell him, what is my vocation? And God kept saying, like, basically, to be loved by me. And he said, no, God, that's not the answer. It's to be loved by me. And eventually God, his life kind of turned out. They ended up getting married and then became a deacon rather than being a priest, and so, and different things, because he was trying to figure out his life, and there were all different things going on. But that's a really true thing, is that, like, what's your vocation? Sometimes we're so trying to figure out what I should do because we're walking on eggshells, because we're trying to avoid disapproval. We're trying to avoid doing the wrong thing because we don't know about our Father's love. And the whole thing really is not rooted, and the thing is, a Jedi uses his things for knowledge and defense, never for attack. And if we use that expanded thing, a Jedi, we could say the Jedi's not using his powers from fear, from a place of fear, defensiveness, this defensive thing. We have to be calm in order to notice whether we're being defensive and attacking and all these other things. And so there's this fear is bound up in those things when we say, hey, I need to know what to do. I need to know my vocation. I need to know this. Really what it is, you need to know the love of your Father. Seek first the kingdom of heaven, and everything else will be added to you. Know the love of the Father. Love and do as thou wilt. That's what Saint Augustine said. Love and do as thou wilt. And we could even add that to love and be. Mother Teresa said, everybody's been created to love and to be loved. Love and be loved, and do as you will. Especially know that you are loved. Love others and know that you're loved, and that will. And what we're saying here is that this pathway toward healing these father wounds is the means toward understanding our vocation, because our vocation is self-gift. Our vocation is familial in the body of Christ. Our vocation is fatherly because it proceeds from the Father who is self-giving love. And so we end up going back into that self-gift through this. And so this is really, we don't want to idolize this monastic thing. And we see this in in their description of the sequel trilogy, where Luke kind of gives up on everything because he has some different failures, and he turns away from this. He really turns away from the whole thing of being a Jedi, because he's he thought he could handle things that he couldn't handle. And he's just heartbroken and confused that he couldn't live up to this image. He thought he was so great. And we have to leave behind that image of being so great if we really want to become human and grounded in reality and able to offer the love of the Father, that real empathy that we are being forged in through the challenges and sufferings of life, that the heart is opening because the shell is breaking. And so one of the beautiful things, and so there's a thing in the sequel trilogy where Luke sees the flaws of the Jedi. He says, all the Jedis were failures. And he just goes to this island and basically gives up. He sees the failures. But eventually, Yoda appears to him and tells him, that failure is the greatest teacher. And that not only is he to pass on his strengths, but he's meant to pass on his weaknesses. And failure is his legacy as well. And because the reason why failure is such an important part of the thing is because failure is what breaks through the shells that we build, of that shell of like, I'm trying to be like my father, or I'm trying not to be like my father. And in a way, we can't succeed in either of those. We're never going to live up to the image, the idealized image that we make, and we're never going to escape the raw humanity, So we need to be able to find the love of our true Father in heaven. And that's the only way that we're going to be able to that real authoritative mercy of our Father in heaven. That true mercy. So Jesus is full of grace and truth. He was the image of the Father, full of grace and truth, I think. Like in him we beheld the fullness of God, and in him we beheld the fullness of the Father, full of grace and truth. And so I think that ultimately we have to remember that the world is broken, but God is writing straight with crooked lines through the broken world that we've been given through our own faults. God didn't make a broken world. We broke the world. We've broken each other's hearts. We've broken our families. It's not God, but God gives us enough freedom. But God's writing, the Father is writing straight with crooked lines to make you fatherly. The Father is making you fatherly by writing straight with crooked lines. The Father who sent a Son who's revealing, when the apostles say, show us the Father, and that'll be enough for us. He says, have you been with me? We see the love of the Father, that the Son gives his life for us, dies. It's like is this fatherly thing of like, I'll die for my family. I'll die for. No greater love has any man than this, but to give his life for his friends. This is what the self gift is like. This love of the Father is like. And this is a gritty love, a love that's grounded in reality. It's not a night. And one of the most beautiful things from this video about Star Wars was also talking about this thing where Luke in the original trilogy has a lot of naive optimism. And life is something that can break our hearts again and again and again. And we need to be cured of naive optimism. But we don't want to be jaded either. We don't want to have jaded despair. That's what we see when Luke is on this island, in this island, and he thinks that the Jedi are a failure and that the Jedi Order needs to end. We see this jaded despair is the opposite of his naive optimism. And we can see this in many ways. The more we have these father wounds or these wounds in our lives, the more we end up having an option intrude into our minds, which tells us, to kind of give up, or to have some type of addiction, or to go away, to stop trying. And this can be the thing of like, oh, I should, but it can be something that's glamorous, like going off to the monastery, or unglamorous, like getting drunk. Like it could be either one, like I'm not going to try to be like my dad anymore. I'm just getting drunk now, or I'm tired of everything, so I'm, not being like my dad. So I'm going to go off to the monastery, whatever it is. There could be all these different ways that the more we have this wound, the more there's these temptations to kind of give up. And the more these other options that are the escape route get amplified in our minds. And so we need to end up with a mature hope. And I think we have to remember that hope can be united to tragedy. I feel like it's so important that we have to have a sense of tragic hope. A knowledge that it's not going to work out here. Life is not going to work out here. Life might not be squeaky clean. Things may not really, that one of the beautiful things in the video is the guy was saying, we have this sense in life that when we're young, that things are going to work out generally. Things are going to work out for us. It's going to be a good life. Maybe it's not going to be a good life. But the thing is, we have to remember this mature hope, which has two elements. That all things work together for good, for those who love God. things work together for good, not things will work out for me. Things are working out in terms of the big plan and the big plan for me, but that plan also has this other piece. That things will work out hereafter, but here things work together for good for those who love God. So there's these two elements that we have to have. This mature hope looks at things in this world not as things that will work out, because your life may be terrible, but understand that the things that go on in life work together for good for those who love God. So things work together. Things don't work out here. Things work out hereafter. Things work out in the life of the age to come, the final judgment, and when everything is, when it's all put back together. It's like when the life of the age to come with the resurrection, everything will work out then, but not now. And that brings back this sense of mature hope, because the thing is, because we can't hope, we can't keep hope, the naive hope is being killed in us. But we have to have a mature hope, or else we'll give up. Or else we won't have the strength to keep going on. Life might not be what we want it to be. We have to have a mature optimism, not a naive optimism. We have to have a mature, sober optimism, not a naive optimism or a jaded despair. Or maybe we could say a mature and sober hope. So those are some ways that we can learn from the life of Luke Skywalker. And I'm sure that you could go back and think, this thing about, this lesson about the, you can probably find different elements of the psyche for each of these things. Like we could say, okay, the id is what we just spoke about with this mature and sober hope as the transformation of the id. We could say that the transformation of the self-image, maybe the ego identity could be this not mythologizing being a monk, or mythologizing, don't mythologize the being not like your father, and don't mythologize the being like your father. That could be something there. And we could also say, that could also tie into superego things with, learning to it's just kind of love those aspects of the Father in us, heal that. There's all different ways it can tie together. I mean, there's going to be, lots of different stuff that you can kind of make some connections here, but that's just a thing that, there's probably a way to systematize this and tie it together in a more systematic way. But I hope that the different messages of this video really helped you. And I hope that this leads you toward the love of the Father.